Welcome to Hubs and Drivers, a podcast for building product marketers sponsored by BLD Marketing. I'm Jeff Donaldson, your host. On today's episode, Making the Case, Best Practices for Case Study Development. Thanks for tuning in. Think about the last time you went to buy a car. There's a good chance that you took it for a test drive to get a better sense of whether or not it felt right, if it was right for you, if it handled the road properly before you signed on the dotted line. Now, translate that concept into your prospects as a building products brand. How can they test drive your innovation, your solution, your product to understand if it does what you say it does? Well, a smartly written case study can accomplish that. It's a testimonial about how your product performed for another customer in a real-world situation. And as a building products company, building out those case studies needs to be a critical component of your content marketing strategy. We're going to have a conversation about that today. Joining me today is a member of my team here at BLD Marketing, Jake Michalski, Senior PR Content Marketing Specialist. Jake, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you and I develop case studies on behalf of clients all the time, many different brands. And there's a very specific process that we try to impart to our clients to help them understand how they can be successful in doing that as their partner, as their agency partner. And we like to call step one, making it a priority. And that's critical in building that framework, that foundation for developing case studies. It has to really focus on getting everybody to buy in, to make it a priority across the organization, because it's not just one person that's developing a case study. They serve as a source of authority and really are a powerful business development tool. Think about salespeople, either out on the road, on the phone, or in general, when they're engaging prospects. If they have that tool in their arsenal, it can be very powerful. It can help them close the deal. So sales, marketing, other key decision makers need to be on board and ready to help develop those case studies, whether it's internally, externally, or in combination with an agency partner such as us. They really need to embrace it as a priority. So step one, make it a priority. Step two, there have to be rules and responsibilities, roles and responsibilities in many ways as well. Who is responsible for identifying the subjects of case studies within the organization? Is that somebody in the organization? Is it somebody with your agency partner? It is a combination of that. And who will take ownership on developing that content, verifying its accuracy, ensuring it is timely and appropriate? There are many steps, many gates you have to go through, gatekeepers that need to be involved. Key people need to embrace this responsibility and carry it forward. So that's the only way you're going to get anywhere when it's developing a case study, developing a process, making it a priority, and confirming roles and responsibilities. We like to provide clients, Jake, with what we like to call the vetting criteria as well for proper development of case studies.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that vetting criteria.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you want to make sure when you're putting together a case study is the project completed. So for our clients in building materials, if it's windows, making sure, of course, the windows are installed on the building. If it's siding, making sure that's done, or even the landscaping, just making sure the project looks really nice. So that's kind of course, the first qualification. Next is viability and ensuring that the project is showcasing your products in an innovative way. So you might ask a couple of questions. What challenge did it solve? What metrics are connected to it? Was the product specified for performance, for aesthetics, for energy efficiency? So making sure that it's a viable solution before we can move forward with putting together the case study.
Right.
Next would be cooperation, and that is really the third-party resource that you're going to be interviewing. Is it the architect that specified the product? Is it the contractor who oversaw the entire job site? Is it the actual installer that had their hands on the product, putting it on the wall? Making sure you have cooperation from that third-party resource, because that ultimately drives credibility for the story.
Right.
And that's who you're going to interview to put together your case study.
Yeah, that credibility is important, because when you have that third party that gets involved, it really boosts that believability, that credibility of the case study itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and then finally is visuals. So you want to have quality photography connected to the case study. You're putting together a really compelling story, you're doing the interview, you got to make sure you have good photography tied to it as well.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because there are times when we've gone down the road with a client and we've developed what we consider to be a fairly compelling case study, and then we find out that we can't take visuals, and that's something you want to deal with up front. And we work with clients to help them understand that in some sense that vetting criteria has to be met before we even get out the gate, because then we're not wasting resources. Jake, the brand now has these well-built, compelling case studies in hand. Once they've gone through this whole process, what do you do with them? Let's talk about merchandising. How do you tell that story, and what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that you want to do is host it somewhere. So put it on your website, make sure it's somewhere that's easily findable, that users on your site can get to it. Is it on your gallery page? Do you have a dedicated case studies page? Making sure people can find it. From there, posting out on social media, you have an engaged audience on your social media channels already. So sharing it there, just another opportunity for people to engage with your content and to read it. And this also allows you, we talked about those third-party stakeholders that you interview, the architect, the contractor, the installer. This gives you an opportunity to tag them and further build that relationship as well. So when you share it out on social, tagging the architecture firm, the contractor, whoever it may be. Yeah. Next is an e-newsletter and featuring the case studies in your e-marketing program. This again leads to further views on your case study and can connect an additional interested audience with your content. So repurposing it that way. There's also the option of featuring the case studies in your sales collateral. And it might not be, if we're putting together a 2-page case study, that might not be fitting for a sales presentation. But kind of chopping it up and focusing on the highlights and the key pieces and putting those in a sales presentation can be, powerful when you're going to sell your product and talking with prospects. Even
incorporating it into something like a PowerPoint, whether it's just 3 or 4 bullet points and a couple of visuals, that in some sense is a source of authority. It's an example. Quite often, years ago when I was a reporter, I always asked the question, give me an example. When you're in a sales engagement, a prospect's going to say, well, you're telling me about this. Give me an example of how it works. When you can give them an example, that's more powerful.
Yeah, it's a success story and it's showcasing to your customers the power of your products.
Right.
And then finally, pitching it. And that's something that on the PR content team we do quite often. Always scanning editorial calendars in the trade publications. And if we have a case study that's perfect for them, we'll work with those editors to hopefully earn media coverage for our clients. So we always use case studies in that fashion and to try to get them featured in the popular trade publications within our space. Their audiences are often directly tied to our clients, and their customers are within those audiences. So if we can generate earned media coverage, that's another a tool that we like to use for the case studies. So there are a lot of ways that you can merchandise it, and that's kind of our top 5 list.
Yeah, and when you talk about the trade magazines, we have found in our experience in working with clients and in working with those across the trade media that they respond pretty favorably to those projects because, again, in some sense, there's even added credibility to it. It is a product or a solution that has worked in a real-world environment, and there are all the details there that are available, and that works well for content for a magazine.
Yep.
So ultimately, a successful case study strategy relies on what we like to call a 3-step process. Step 1, identification. You want to pick projects based on that vetting criteria that we talked about. Are there good visuals? Do you have the cooperation of third parties? Is it completed? Does it really give you a compelling solution that you can talk about? And then you want to assemble all those assets, the metrics, the pictures, the stakeholders for incorporation. Get all the assets in place in that step 1 of identification. Step 2 is development, conducting the interviews with appropriate subject matter experts. As agency partners, we work with clients. Sometimes we're doing those interviews. We're interviewing somebody within the client organization or an architect or a contractor or an installer. And then you want to tell that story based on what we like to call a pre-approved format. You want to think about it being a problem solution, or you want to categorize it in an appropriate industry, making sure that it is in the lane and is understandable and credible. And then step 3 is merchandising. Jake was just talking about that. You've got this great story, you've assembled it, you've vetted it. Now it's about packaging it up, making sure that it is based on the brand guidelines, that it is on brands, and then sharing it on earned and owned media channels, putting it on your website, pitching it on social media, pitching it to the media, incorporating it in your e-newsletter strategy to make sure you're getting that message out and telling that story. Case studies can be a powerful solution, and hopefully today we've shared some best practices. So here's another way to merchandise those case studies. You've got something on paper. What about putting visuals to it? What about developing a video case study library? Now you've got your customers and other stakeholders talking about your product, talking about that real world solution. Think about what you can do with that. You could put it on your social media channels, on your website. Perhaps it's even something you can use for fulfillment in your paid media program. It has a lot of legs to it. And it's even more compelling because now it's on video. It's others talking about your brand and talking about your solutions. Hey, would you like us to cover a specific topic here on Hubs and Drivers? Maybe it's something you haven't heard about yet and you'd like more information on it. Reach out to us. We'd love to get your suggestions. Email us at info@hubsanddriverspodcast.com. That's info@hubsanddriverspodcast.com. And make sure to follow us and like us on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. That's all for this edition of Hubs and Drivers. I'm Jeff Donaldson, your host. Thanks for being here.